Hello and welcome to Curzon Living Room, an ongoing season of live Q&As on Curzon Home Cinema. And my name is Mia Bays and I run Bird's Eye View, and we are a pathfinder for films by women and a network for those who show them, release them, want to watch them like you. And today I'm delighted that I am in conversation with director Alla Kovgan about her latest documentary, Cunningham. And so if you're watching us live, we will be taking your questions. I'll start and then we'll take your questions on YouTube, Twitter or Facebook. The Twitter handle is at Curzon Cinema, so please use the hashtag Curzon Living Room and we'll read out as many as we can. Alla, it's so nice to meet you. And you're, I'm in London and you are in New York, correct?
Yes, all the way in Harlem in New York City, yes.
Wonderful.
Hello.
Okay, that's very exotic for us. Although we're all in our living room, so yeah, it's not so different in many ways. So it's strange to be talking like this, but really important to be connecting. And it's really interesting to be talking about your doc because it just reminds us of the glory of movement, which we can't really do much at the moment. So just let's start by talking about what was the first signal that you got from the creative gods that you needed to make a film about Merce Cunningham. You've made dance films before, so tell us about where did the idea start?
It's a great question because I always say I never imagined making a film about Merce Cunningham. Sometimes the subjects choose you versus you choose the subjects because he's a kind of choreographer. He would have 15 people going to different directions and you cannot frame a single shot. So because of my interest in dance film, of course, I knew of him and of his work specifically with technology. But what happened was the film Pina came out by Wim Wenders. It's a film about a German choreographer, Pina Bausch. It's an interesting fact that Pina Bausch and Merce Cunningham died a few weeks apart. Right. So in 2009, and I went to see the last performances of the Merce Cunningham Dance Company after I watched a 3D film by Wim Wenders, Pina. And it really hit me when I was sitting there at the Brooklyn Academy of Music, watching those dancers go in different directions, that Merce and 3D could be a good fit, primarily because both work in space. All his life, Merce Cunningham spent thinking about how to arrange and choreograph bodies in space, and 3D gives you a very interesting sense of distance. You almost like experience distance between people, which is very unique. You feel very close to people. And so that's something that interests me. So everything started from the work. It didn't start with my obsession with Merce Cunningham in any way, but I just was really interested in trying to translate his choreographic ideas into cinema with capital C using 3D technology.
And so it took you 7 years. So can you talk us through kind of how did it evolve from the beginning? So you started with 3D and how, I mean, that film is terrific, Pina, as is yours. And I can see how they sit side by side, but your, obviously the approach is very different. So can you talk a little bit about how did you evolve because shooting in 3D is not easy either, is it? And it's expensive.
No. Yeah, absolutely. And I never, made a 3D film. I mean, I was never afraid of technology, just sometimes some people do, but I edited for 15 years. I had my own, performance group. I done expanded cinema, all kinds of things. So I was never afraid of technology. That's something that didn't scare. But for me, it was interesting to understand the language, what language 3D cinema has actually, and how is it different from what we usually make, and how can it engage with the language of choreography. So that was I feel of myself, I think of myself as a formalist, and that's something that sort of I could connect to Cunningham that way. But a very important thing, as I began researching who he was as a human being, for me it was really a journey of discovery, trying to understand how he was ticking as a person, because there were 18 films made on Merce of all kinds by very famous people. So what was I offering? What was different? That's something that I was really focusing on, and as I was researching, I discovered that Merce was an incredible humanist, you know, and just his whole philosophy and attitude to what it means to be alive. And that can pertain not only to people who love dance or, you know, sports or anything physical, but just to every human being, because he really believed, you know, while we're alive, we're moving, which is a very obvious thing, you know, while we're moving, we're alive, right? And we actually at best of being human when we move. So that was incredibly inspiring. But so I wrote a letter to Robert Swinston, who was a Merce Cunningham Trust trustee, and he immediately came on board and also brought Jennifer Goggins, who danced with Merce for 12 years. Robert was with Merce for 32 years. And together we looked at a lot of works, you know, around 80 works. Merce made 80 works between 1942 and 1972. That's the period that interested me the most. And we can, of course, talk about that too. And we went through these dances, some of which were very well documented. Some just had notes, and we picked 14 works. And out of those 14 works, we picked excerpts. Now, mostly these were iconic works, collaborations with visual artists. I mean, Merce Cunningham was notorious for collaborating with amazing artists, such as Robert Rauschenberg, Andy Warhol, Jasper Jones, many different people. So we were very much interested in these collaborations of his. And then we would think about those dances in cinema terms. And actually, just to clarify, you know, Merce always started his dance with a physical question or concept. He wouldn't start with a piece of music or a narrative or a story or emotional state, but something physical. So we identified those physical questions and concepts behind each dance, and then we would think about them in cinema. And if you start thinking about dance in cinema terms, you're immediately going away from theatrical stages, because cinema doesn't think in theatrical stages, it thinks in places and spaces. Yeah, so that's often people ask about location. That's how we sort of were thinking about those dances. And that took about 7 months. So then in 2013, we got a license from Merce Cunningham Trust. So that was all happening. We were working with not knowing whether we're going to make the film or not. Finally, we got the license, and then we could do rehearsals. So we did 6 weeks of rehearsals with Cunningham trained dancers in 2013. And we're hoping that since, you know, then it's just going to be all great open journey, we would do everything fast, but that never happened. I can go more into details, but it's a long road. I think you know, you never know when you start a project how long it's going to take, and you always hope it's going to be fast, but it never quite works like that. So just to kind of big signposts. So we felt we could not raise money in America, even though it's such a New York story, New York artist. So we ended up making the film European with Germany and France primarily. In 2015, we got to do a pilot financed out of France and the US. That was the first dance we made, was Summer Space, which is the Rauschenberg decor, the pointillist decor piece. And after that, we got to film only in 2018. The shoot took 18 days. So we shot 15 days in Germany, 1 day in New York, and 2 days in France. Actually, those 2 days are in 2015 altogether. So, and editing took about, I think, 9 months of editing. So that's, the film was released miraculously to Cunningham's centenary in 2019. Again, nobody planned that. I guess he did. That's why I say maybe not me choosing him, but he choosing me. And that's basically the whole story.
And it's still quite rare, isn't it, to have a feature film about dance? It's pretty, it's such an art form that's sort of associated with the live experience. So can you talk about how, but your recreations of his dance are really beautiful, and the art direction and the aerial work and the kind of experience of space is really powerful. Can you talk a bit more about how you kind of conceptualize the cinematic experience?
Right, as I touched a bit, you know, the idea was to not to capture dance, but to create cinema, you know, to translate Merce's ideas into cinema. And if you think about the history of, you know, cinema and dance, it goes way back, because, you know, the cinema was invented to capture emotion. The first performers were mostly, or actors, so-called, were physical comedians. I mean, think about Buster Keaton, Charlie Chaplin, Laurel and Hardy. I mean, you name it. All these people made cinema popular, which is just such an interesting fact. So I think in general, cinema is really good at capturing action and making images rather than anything else. So there's an affinity between dance and film. That's why partly that I feel so keen on it, because I think there's a definitely intersection. There's a language, and you know, they say the picture is worth 1,000 words. I think the gesture is worth 1,000 words, because, you know, if you go to Central Park and look at people running, you can say so much about them by the way they run. So physicality has been a big part of it. But at the form level, I think, you know, 3D is somewhat whimsical. For instance, what I learned is it's not easy to cut from a wide shot to a close-up, and this is just a, you know, grammar, film grammar, that we all know it. So if you can't cut between a wide shot and a close-up easily, I mean, what happens is, you know, you get disoriented, the space changes, and it takes you a few seconds to recover after the cut. It disturbs your eyes. So we had a sort of a rule. So we would try to film every movement phrase in a single shot. So that was a kind of a secret. And then we cut to a new phrase. So that requires quite a meticulous choreography of the camera in relation to dance. And basically, to me, whenever it works, it means that everything is worked out. You know, every second, we basically know what the camera sees every second. You know, so in a theater, you know, you can make those choices. You as a viewer, you choose where to look. In cinema, I have to make those choices. We have to make those choices for the camera. If we don't, I always say camera is quite stupid. It doesn't know where to look if you don't tell it. And because all these people are moving, you have to sort of choreograph human eye. And that takes a lot of time and often a lot of people to do that. And that's why I feel so few people actually do that, because it's quite complicated and difficult. And when we would come to a location, we would basically, you know, measure it, model it in an architecture program called CAD. Then we'll put that model in a storyboarding program. Storyboards are those sort of drawings that we make before we shoot, right? And then we would put all our equipment, cranes, Steadicams, lights. We make the dancers inside that software and basically animate everything. So by the time we get to the set, to the shooting day, we know everything. We know exactly what's going to happen and who has to do what. And that's primarily the limitation also of the production and how many shooting days we had. If we didn't have that process, we would have never been able to do it. But in cinema, you sort of choreograph all the elements. And so the dances, the sets, the costumes, the light, the architecture of the space all become sort of part of every shot. So you basically become, it's a synthesis of all these different elements.
Wonderful. We have a question from Jen from London, who said, I love the movie and I did not know much about Merce before I watched it. And I read he did not use music when he choreographed. So did you choose music to accompany the performances in the film? How can you talk a bit more about that?
Great question. Thank you, Jen. So the approach was the following. We really wanted to keep the original score with the original dancers. So in most cases, you hear the music that Merce used in the performances, in those specific performances. there were some moments, like for instance, in a dance called Winter Branch, which is from 1964. It's on the rooftop. It's at night. You see searchlight. People, the dancers are in black with those kind of, American footballer kind of smashes under their eyes. So in that dance, for instance, Merce used silence. There was no music for half of the performance, and there was Le Monde Young score for another half of the performance. So it's an interesting dilemma because we're actually using excerpts. It's not the full performance. We're only working with excerpts. So in those cases, and it's interesting, when we tried to put the original score, Le Monde Young, it felt too much. It was just this kind of squeaky sound that was very monotone, and in some way, was sort of destroying the choreography. So Merce often made events. He's notorious for doing that. And what it is he would come to a location and he would assess what is possible in that particular location and would select excerpts from his different dances and would put them together like a collage. And that would become a new performance. And that is what's called the event. And he would often do it. There may be no music at all, just the environment, right, of the location the dancers are performing, or he may commission a new score, which can be improvised live or can be created prior. But so we basically use that approach. So in some cases, like in Winter Branch, we took away the original music and used the environment as a background. Miraculously, in that particular dance, there was a club downstairs. And in that club, it was loud music, drunken people, and we were very annoyed by the situation. But when I was in the editing, I remembered that, and I was thinking, oh, John Cage would have used that environment. So we basically recreated the environment that we happened to have while we were shooting, and the band that we put in the club. Now we're in cinema, we can choose the band now. Was Throbbing Gristle, because I did a research on, which bands John Cage influenced the most, and it turned out Throbbing Gristle was one of them. So I'm super proud that we have Throbbing Gristle in one and John Cage in the same movie. But that was the approach. So it was either the original score or it was the environment sound. We also had a composer, Hauschka, who is German composer, and he is a king of prepared piano himself. So he created interstitials for just the archive and different moments where I felt like we needed some kind of sound or music. So that was all Hauschka's score. And once we picked the guitar as the main sort of instrument for his part, right? And once we found that instrument, it sort of became a kind of a bed of sound for some of the moments that we worked with. Yeah.
Wonderful. I made a film about Scott Walker, the musician, and there's a line. I always feel like there's often a scene or a line as a filmmaker that just sort of reminds you of why you made the film about a person, particularly when you make biography. And for me, in that film, it's Scott Walker talks about his process, that he's about stripping his personality out of his voice, and in order that it's just about a man singing. And for me, that just taught me so much about just not just art, but life, the ego has to be kind of overcome, and that great art is often subsuming the ego. And Merce feels like an artist with just so many deep philosophies. I mean, you hear many of them, but what did Merce teach you as an artist? What is the thing or things that you really took away?
It's a great question. Thank you. I think, the phrase I can share, he used to say, the only way to do it is to do it. So that really helped me, a lot, because the man, he had such a long artistic career of 70 years, basically. He is very recognized, iconic artist not only choreographer, but just as an artist. But his life had so many different sort of ups and downs. And I never, for me, it's also the life of a dancer, because, you know, he sort of says at the very beginning that dancing, I'm a dancer, dancing is the most important thing to me. And I really wanted to make this film from a position or perspective of a dancer. Mm-hmm. Most people don't know what the dancers do every day. You know, you can imagine what the composer does, what the visual artist does, what the writer is doing, but not the dancer. I mean, because people don't have an experience of dancer's life, or sort of, so I just really wanted to tell his story from that perspective. And when I began researching, I realized that how difficult those first 30 years were for him between 1942 and 1972, because he had no money, he had no press, he had no audience, and most importantly, he had no opportunities to perform. Mm-hmm. And he was at the height of his physical ability. Mm-hmm. Now, what does it mean for a dancer to be at the height of your physical ability and perform 5 times per year? And yet, to go back to class every day or to rehearsal and begin again. That's another very famous Merce's phrase, we begin again, and continue and persevere and keep going. That's just mind-boggling, you know, and that spirit of perseverance of his really inspired me and kept me going for those 7 years.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Alla. There's a great question from Danny from Edinburgh. It was wonderful to see the film, to see the performances in a cinematic context. It made me think that it's strange how few dance films there are. Does the film world understand dance?
Does the film world understand dance? It doesn't. Great question. I mean, again, it's for those reasons. I mean, most filmmakers are afraid of dancers, and not because of people, but understand, just because you're engaging with another art form, right? It's not just you as a filmmaker, it's you and the art form of choreography. Yeah. Now, interesting, choreography, what is choreography? It's a very interesting question, because choreography is an art of organizing action in time and space. Now, filmmakers know that very well. We constantly organize action in time and space. We tell the actors where to walk, what to do, how fast, all these things. So we constantly deal with the mise en scène, right? The choreographers also constantly deal with the mise en scène, but the time factor is so different. You understand that, right? So because what you can do in 1 minute in cinema and what you can do in 1 minute in theater is two different things. So, and also, you know, I'll tell you a very sort of an anecdote from our production. Despite the fact that we storyboarded everything and were very, very prepared, oftentimes we would come on set and explain everything to our crew, you know, and we had quite a big crew, 85 people at this particular, in different days, you know, but we'd have a crane with 3 people operating, for instance, and, you know, we'd have people who manage Warhol pillows, right, for instance, with the fans, and we would have, you know, some light change that needs to happen. So all these people become part of choreography, right? We're trying to choreograph them, and at first they understand everything, but as soon as the dancers show up, they go into this kind of halt, because they are incredibly scared by the people. They say they move too fast. They don't know what to do. And we say, no, we calculated everything in the software. It's gonna all work. So we're just gonna start. We're gonna start walking it very slowly, you know, just walking it. Then we'll do it half speed. Then we'll do full speed. So it's a kind of, we get used to the process. And eventually the shot works out. But it requires incredible preparation and incredible synchronicity among many, many people, which actually takes time, right? Takes skill and money, you know, which more and more I feel like the film industry is not willing to to put up with. I think technology now can make Angelina Jolie fly any way the director wants. She doesn't have to do anything. I mean, she has to, but not in a sense that, you know, Fred Astaire had to do, for instance, or others. The other thing, I feel like the best films will be done by choreographers with film. And that's what has been proven. I mean, think about Jerome Robbins, West Side Story, think about, you know, Bob Fosse, All That Jazz and Cabaret. These are the people, this is very interesting because these are the films that everybody knows, independently of the age, cultural upbringing, you know, country, they're always popular, right? Or Sing in the Rain. I mean, we can go to all this golden era of American musicals, or Red Shoes, talking, you know, about Britain, you know, Michael Powell and Pressburger. I mean, dance and film, you know, when they come together well, they're always incredibly popular. The problem is that, you know, you have to sort of be willing to collaborate, you know, to collaborate and engage at that kind of level. And I think, you know, of course, it's much easier if a choreographer who embraced cinema and who spent 10,000 hours in cinema and knows the language, it's much easier for them, you know, to manage to work with choreography and cinema as a one person.
Mm-hmm. Can you talk about a little bit about the collaborators? Obviously, Kale and Rauschenberg being the most significant, and how, I mean, it's so hard to kind of represent relationships. I mean, obviously you had some archive, but can you just talk about how you kind of gave that kind of credence and the sensitivities around it too?
Right, it was John Cage, yeah, not John Cale.
Sorry, Cage, sorry.
Yeah, that's all right. But yes, I mean, more and more correspondence comes out between John Cage and you know, Merce Cunningham. They were lovers, they were life partners, they were creative partners. They had a very long time together that also had a lot of ups and downs. I felt that everything that we discuss in the film that relates to biographical information or to events that took place or happened with Merce and his company is there just to give an insight into his personality, and also get you to allow the audience to get deeper into the work, right? So it's not a biopic in a sense that we cannot go deeply into those relationships, primarily because we're trying to make a portrait of an artist through his work. But at the same time, we wanted to bring them up, right? So with specifically John Cage, a lot of people say we would like to know more about their relationships. Well, you know, there's a famous I think in the late 1980s, there's this you know, famous conference, so some kind of Q&A happened where Cage and Cunningham were together, and somebody asked from the audience, you know, what are your personal relationships? That was like late 80s, and John Cage answered, I cook and Merce does the dishes. That was the one and only public acknowledgement of those relationships, primarily because of the time when this relationship began, which was in late 30s, early 40s. And it's interesting, I was showing the film in Russia, and somebody, I asked this journalist what is going on with the gay rights and all that in Russia, and how does it feel for the gay artists here and all this, and he asked me, how did it feel for Merce Cunningham and John Cage in 1950? So, you know, so this was the time when everybody was in the closet, basically, and they did not make work about their identity in any way. They did not publicly identify as gay men. You know, I mean, of course, everyone knew, but I think David Wong, the Cunningham historian whom I dedicate the film, he met Merce in 1950, and he said that he learned that Merce and John were a couple in 1964, because when they went on world tour, and it was clear they could share a room, so it was a taboo subject. It wasn't something they were open about, and I felt like I had to respect that. I had to sort of work with what's available in the public view, and those letters were published, although of course I did much more research into their relationships. I just wanted to be very careful and delicate about handling them. But a relationship with Rauschenberg, just, there was a very intense relationships. It's a whole decade when they were very, very close and working. They made 16 collaborations out of the 22 within those, 10 years practically. Again, I couldn't get into, this kind of drama that took place. I felt like it's not my movie. I mean, my movie is just basically to give an insight in what happened. And if people are interested, they would go and find out.
Sure. Okay, we have, I think, time for one last question, if that's okay, Alla.
Sure.
Jane from Bristol, this is a good question too. Did you read reactions or reviews of Cunningham's work from the time, and did this inform the film in any way?
Right. I've done quite a bit of research, you can imagine. I actually had to write a script, like a fiction script, because in Europe, often they ask you to do that. For a long time, they were quite negative, the reactions to his work, until, except for a few people like Edwin Denby, this very great critic, dance critic in New York. He definitely had some supporters and people who loved his work, and it was a kind of like that. You either loved it or you hated it. There's a very interesting book called Dance for Expert: Cultural Diplomacy of the United States that basically it dates back to the period when the United States decided to show the Soviet bloc that they also had culture, and they decided to export the dances to Eastern Europe, to the Soviet bloc. And so they discussed who was American, who would represent America. And basically they decided that Cunningham was not American enough to be sent. John Cage was sort of okay. They can maybe send Cunningham as his kind of kickback, but not to significantly important, politically important regions, maybe like to Asia. That was the decision. So they thought of Cunningham as not American enough, which was very interesting. So, and that was Lincoln Curzon. I mean, for New York is a big name, like to Lincoln Center and all this. So what I'm just saying, like, he didn't have support here. But the people who actually could recognize his talent is primarily the Londoners. It's basically in London that the tide turned 100%. I mean, there were people also in France and Germany and Sweden and Finland and all over the place. But those 3 weeks in London really changed everything for Merce, and that is because primarily, in order to understand what he was doing, you had to have some kind of background. In America, we don't have kind of a mass cultural education in the sense that, kids don't go to dance performances. It's not part of culture. So it becomes a kind of an elite situation. But I think there's just, in Europe, there are more people who have general cultural education that they can appreciate what Cunningham, and they've seen a lot, so they can compare Cunningham to things they've seen, and they can recognize that he's a maverick and he's trying to do something that has never been done before. So I think that's the reason he got incredible support in Europe.
So I think we need to wrap up, Alla. So I just wanted to say, have you got any final message for the audience, or maybe tell us what you're up to next? What can we expect next from you?
So I think just I invite everyone to keep watching the movie. I think it's really good right now because it's great to think about our bodies and the fact that we're alive and how much space we need to move, and the fact that we are, human, non-digital beings. And Merce is really great. He's great to remind us, but it's also he's great to remind us that he had 70-year career, and we'll get over this. I am sure. So I'm working primarily, I'm trying to make a fiction film. I would like to bring physicality back to cinema. And a specific artist I'm thinking about is a Korean choreographer, Yunmi An. So we actually started the project 10 years ago before I got into Merce's project, and so I kind of would like to go back. But it's really fiction, something like Lars von Trier meets Bob Fosse, something set in Korea. So I think that's where we're going.
Wow. Alla, that sounds fabulous. It's been lovely talking to you. We wish you so much luck with that. And we want Cunningham to be as big a hit as possible. So I would like to thank you and thank Dogwoof. So Alla Kovgan, please follow you on social, etc. Thank you to Dogwoof, who are the distributor who have put this film out. And so thank you to everyone for making this possible. So if you haven't seen the film, you can stream it on Curzon Home Cinema. And if you enjoyed this event and the film, please tell everyone. It's really important, especially for us. Please see more films by women. That's the message. So upcoming next week in Curzon Living Room, we have on Wednesday, 13th of May, Fergus Grady and Noel Smith, who will be talking about their new doc, Camino Skies. And then on Friday, the 15th of May, Vicky Leslie will be talking about her film, The Atom, A Love Affair, which is about the changing relationship to nuclear power over the years. And if you're interested in Bird's Eye View, we have a live event tomorrow at 12 o'clock midday with Kitty Green, the director of The Assistant, which is also streamed on Curzon Home Cinema. And then upcoming, we have another film which will be on the service as well, which is called Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always. And that is, and we have an event with the director, Eliza Hitman, coming up on the 14th of May. So please follow Bird's Eye View, and thank you and goodbye.